Okay, I'll start in the traditional way with the verse of homage to the Buddha. Sri Lankan style. Actually, my style a little different. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. First I want to again extend my thanks to Ajahn Pisano for inviting me or requesting me to give the Dhamma talk this afternoon, and also for hosting me at this wonderful monastery for the past 2 weeks. Oh, it's hard to believe that these 2 weeks have gone by so quickly. It seems that I just arrived here and now it's time to depart. And I also want to express my gratitude to all of the lay people whose support, encouragement, dedication has made this Abhayagiri monastery possible, because the Sangha couldn't do it alone without the support of the lay community. So it's that sort of mutual relationship of monastics and the laity that make a monastery spring up and flourish. And so I think that the fact that this monastery has flourished so beautifully over the last few years is testimony both to the skill and vision of Ajahn Pisano and the other senior monks here, as well as the dedication and support of the lay community. So I think all of you are to congratulate each other for making this place possible. And it's truly, I say, one of the jewels of Buddhism here in North America. Okay, I wanted to base my talk this afternoon on a series of verses that occurs in the Dhammapada, in the chapter, the Sahasravagga. That's the chapter on the thousands. And it's a series of verses that I grew very fond of over the years and often recite in my own sort of daily recitation. There are 6 verses. They're numbers 110 to 115 in the Dhammapada. And they all have a similar, each verse has a similar structure. And the basic theme of these 6 verses is what makes a life truly worthwhile. What should be the purpose or aim of our life, particularly as we are following the Buddha's teaching. And you know, in the contemporary world, with the dominance of a kind of materialistic philosophy, the whole emphasis in our sort of society, particularly the medical community, is in extending our lifespan so that we can live as long as possible. You know, now people take it for granted that they can easily live to the age of 80, 85. Quite a number of people get into the 90s, even a few, the lucky ones, lucky with the question mark after it, make it up into the hundreds, into over 100. And we have all methods to make a longer lifespan possible. Newer medications, and if the medications are not completely successful, then there are various kinds of surgeries that one can undergo. And even when organs start to fail, you know, we've developed techniques for replacing defective organs with more effective organs. So decades ago, there was the first experiments in the heart transplant. Now it's pretty much a routine operation. Then there are liver transplants. Kidney, is there a kidney transplant? There is a kidney transplant. Yeah, with somebody with both failing kidneys, so somebody can donate a kidney and that's transplanted. And I think perhaps the next thing they'll be working on, if they haven't done it yet, is a brain transplant. So I imagine sometime in the distant, maybe not so distant future, we won't need these organic physical bodies anymore, but they'll be able to sort of download a person's entire personality with all of its memories and character traits, maybe even the karmic imprints from previous lives, load it all down onto some kind of compact disc, and put it into a completely plastic device modeled to look just like the original person, then upload all of that data, and then one has a lifespan just as long as that indestructible plastic can continue, perhaps until the time the sun explodes and the earth is consumed in fire. Of course, if the longer the lifespan gets extended, then when death does become imminent, the more terrifying it will become. Okay, so one way, one way of looking at the value of life is to extend the lifespan as long as possible. But these verses, these string of 6 verses, give a different perspective on the value of a human life. Okay, the first verse, first I'll recite it in Pali and then give a very literal translation. Yocha vasa satang jive dusilo asamahito ekahang jivitang seyo silavantasa jayino. That is, if someone should live 100 years immoral, without sila, and not without samadhi, a samahito, a life of one day is better for one who is virtuous, who has sila, good behavior, and who is meditative. So this verse is comparing 2 people, one who lives 100 years but of corrupt behavior, no effort to achieve any kind of higher consciousness of samadhi, and somebody who lives, of course, a baby who's just 1 day old is not going to be, naturally has sila, since they're not going to be destroying anything, but they don't have any meditation. So it's not saying that a baby who lives just 1 day and then passes away has a better life than the other person. But the point is that no matter how long we live, if we devote our life to observing the silas, the principles of ethical behavior, and the practice of meditation, our life is better than that life of 100 years with corrupt behavior and without meditation. Okay, and I think we could say that, even for now, just put aside the aspect of meditation, but if one just takes the aspect of sila and compares somebody who lives a virtuous life with somebody who lives a corrupt life, somebody who does it without any hesitation, kills other beings, takes what is not given, engages in sexual misconduct, speaks falsely, indulges in intoxicants, you could see, and then compare that with somebody who lives a life of moral restraint, abiding by, at minimum, the 5 precepts. We could see that the life of one who observes these principles of moral restraint is so much more worthy, so much more valuable, so much more precious, both to that person themselves as well as to the other people in their community and in the world. And if you just reflect, leaving aside the aspect of meditation, you're observing the 5 precepts very, very faithfully and diligently, and when you're coming to the end of your life, you can look back at the course of your life and you can reflect that throughout my life, at least from the time that I reached maturity and undertook the 5 precepts, I didn't inflict harm on any other being. Just reflecting that much, that in my presence, all other living beings were able to feel that their life is secure, that their life is protected, that all other people can feel in my presence that their property is secure, that they're not property, possessions are not in danger of being plundered, that their spouses, that there would be no threat to their relationships, to their marital relationships, that people will be confident that the words that I spoke were true, honest, sincere, helpful to create harmony amongst others rather than divisions. So if you reflect back in that way, then that would be a cause just in itself sufficient for giving joy at the end of your life, the sense that my life has made a positive contribution to the people in my family, my community, society, country, even the world. And so just observing the silas is a very powerful positive factor that gives meaning, significance, and makes our life worthy of admiration. But from the perspective of the Buddha's teaching, it's not enough just to observe the silas, but one has to go on in following the path to cultivate the higher mind, the higher consciousness, and that requires some effort in meditation aimed at the attainment of samadhi. So that's why the verse uses the verbal form, jayantassa, one who is practicing jhana, the act of meditation aimed at becoming samahito, one who possesses samadhi. And so in Buddhism, we could say that the Buddha's teaching, it's somewhat like a pharmacy with many different medicines to fit different types of illnesses. So people have different kinds of mental afflictions, mental defilements. So the Buddha teaches many different methods or subjects of meditation intended as the antidotes to these defilements. And so we might say that our daily intake, the regular supply of nutrients that we take into our regular meals, that might be compared to the practice of something like mindfulness of breathing, using a very, very simple method of meditation that lights up the contents of our mind, since when we're trying to focus on the breath, then all of the different thought formations, desires, inclinations, tendencies, impulses of the mind start coming into awareness. So that is what sort of helps us get acquainted with the workings of our mind, to come to better understand our mind, and to help us learn to quiet down the mind and to gain some degree of concentration. But then other mental afflictions start to intrude upon the mind, and when that happens, then one can resort to some of the other meditation subjects as a way of balancing the mind and clearing away those mental afflictions. For example, some people become prone, when they start to meditate, sort of unconscious or unrecognized states of anger, aggression, ill will, and towards others come into the mind. In that case, one could develop the practice of loving-kindness meditation, the metta bhavana. And other people, and this is particularly relevant to monastics, states of sensual desire, sensual lust can arise. In that case, we can take up the meditation on the parts of the body, the 32 parts of the body, seeing how, though we look at the body sort of superficially with our ordinary sight as being beautiful and attractive, but when we start probing and examining into the constituents of the body, taking them one by one, we see that they're not so beautiful and attractive. And then a sort of general, this is like a strong tonic to energize the heedless or lazy mind, is the meditation on death. When we recognize that death is inevitable and we can never be certain when it's going to occur, that will give us a strong motivation for undertaking the practice diligently. I was just reading yesterday that biography of Ajahn Chah, and I was looking ahead into the last chapter, which is discussing his trip to America. And at that time, he was traveling with Paul Brighter, who had in the early days been a monk. And Ajahn Chah was speaking to the American audience at the Insight Meditation Center in Barre, Massachusetts. And he was telling the people, you should practice meditation on death 3 times a day. And Paul Brighter said, why should I do that? I'm still a young man. I'm sure I'm going to live to be, to a ripe old age. I could live to the age of 100. And Ajahn Chah said, that's the way of thinking of a fool. Okay, so we use these different meditation methods as the particular situation requires, aiming to strengthen our concentration, aspiring for the state of samadhi in which the mind becomes focused one-pointedly without distraction on its object. And since the verse mentions here sila and samadhi, or sila and meditation, it's interesting to note that these 2 factors work sort of in tandem to purify each other. Like we might start off with a relatively coarse observance of sila or moral discipline, but as we're attempting to develop meditation, we have to bring into play mindfulness and clear comprehension, which enables us to recognize not only our thought patterns, but also our aspects of the kinds of actions in which we engage. And we also understand our motivations better. And so when we gain that recognition, that helps us to change our motivations and to see where our conduct is defective. And so in this way, the practice of meditation will help to purify sila, or virtue. And then as virtue gets purified, it also helps to strengthen the power of meditation. So sila, you could say, is like the base on which the practice of meditation takes place or unfolds. And in this case, the base supports the practice, and the practice also bends back and purifies the base. Okay, so here in this verse we have the contrast of one of corrupt behavior, immoral behavior, with one of virtuous behavior, and one who is without meditation, and one who practices meditation. Now we come to the second verse. Again, I'll recite in Pali. Yocha vasa satang jive dupanyo asamahito ekahang jivitang seyo panyavantasa jayino. So one who lives 100 years devoid of wisdom and without samadhi, if one lives, it is better to live a single day possessing wisdom and meditating. Okay, so here with this verse we bring in the third major factor of the threefold training. So we have sila, samadhi, and panya. So here it's contrasting one who lives without wisdom. And so without wisdom means that one doesn't understand what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. It means that one has a distorted understanding of things, so that one takes, again, like Paul Brighter in that story, one thinks that one is going to live a long, long lifespan, and so in that way you think I can behave in any way that I want, and so one can act recklessly, carelessly, without any consideration for others, without any scruples, without any moral scruples. So that all comes from the lack of wisdom. Okay, and that is contrasted with one who has wisdom. And again, the most elementary form of wisdom is the wisdom that could understand the distinction of good and bad, right and wrong, what is unwholesome, what is wholesome, and also understands in relation to that our actions have consequences, and they have consequences for ourselves, that our actions eventually, inevitably, bounce back upon us. The actions create karmic dispositions, and those karmic dispositions remain deposited in the deep strata of the mind, and when they meet with the appropriate conditions, then those dispositions come to maturity and produce their fruits. And so if one acts in unwholesome ways, in harmful ways, in ways that are destructive to the good of others, then those actions will bounce back upon ourselves and bring harm and suffering for ourselves, if not in this life, then in future lives. And so wisdom is understanding. At the first stage, first level, it's understanding that principle, that law, first understanding the ethical distinctions and understanding the law of karma that builds upon those ethical distinctions and ensures that all ethically significant actions eventually bounce back upon ourselves. Okay, having wisdom also contributes to the development of meditation, because it's through wisdom that one is able to see into one's own mind and to understand what are the mental factors that are arising in my mind, and then to evaluate those mental factors and to see, are those mental factors contributing to my well-being? Are they contributing to the progress of my practice? Are these mental factors helping to develop samadhi? Or are these mental factors hindrances and obstacles that are preventing the development of samadhi? Okay, so with this wisdom, the initial wisdom, or maybe you call this the second stage wisdom, we're able to understand the workings of our mind better and to know how to train and to discipline our minds in order to promote the development of concentration. And then the third level of wisdom is the wisdom that sees into the real nature of things. This is the wisdom that builds upon samadhi, the wisdom that arises when the mind becomes sufficiently concentrated to see the nature of dharmas, the nature of things, to see them yatha bhutang as they really are. And that means basically to see impermanence, suffering, and non-self. But we're going to come to that a little further as we go through the series of verses. Okay, so we have now the first verse mentions sila and samadhi. The second verse mentions panya and samadhi. So we have here sila, samadhi, panya. Those three constitute together they constitute the threefold training of the Buddha's path. But there are still 3 more verses in this series. Okay, so the next verse says, Yo che vasa satang jive kusito hina virio ekahang jivitang seyo viryang arapato dalhang. If one should live 100 years lazy and negligent, one who discards or abandons energy, better to live a single day having firmly aroused energy. So here in this verse, the key contrast is between laziness or negligence and virya, which is energy or effort. And energy in the Buddha's training is not just going about any task quickly, brusquely, forcefully, but it's energy in the training of the mind. And particularly the way it's explained in the texts, it's energy in overcoming, eliminating, and removing the unwholesome states of mind, and energy in the cultivation, the development of the wholesome qualities, the wholesome states of mind. So the qualities or the mental states that have to be abandoned with energy would be things like the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, dullness, restlessness, doubt. And then there are many good qualities that we have to cultivate, that we have to develop. For example, we find mentioned some of these good qualities mentioned in the Mangala Sutta, like reverence, humility, contentment, patience. Other qualities would be loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity, as well as the meditative factors, the more meditative factors like mindfulness, clear comprehension, tranquility, concentration. And so we use energy as a way of removing, overcoming the unwholesome states and developing the wholesome states. And this energy applies particularly in this sequence in the cultivation of meditation. So this is the energy that would be applied to the development of samadhi and panya, wisdom. And so in order to apply energy, one has to apply it skillfully. And to apply energy skillfully, one has to have some understanding of one's own mind. So energy just doesn't work on its own, but energy works together with mindfulness and with clear comprehension. We find this in the Satipatthana Sutta, even where the Buddha says that one dwells contemplating, for example, the body and the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, and mindful. So it's called ardent here. That is specifically the factor of energy. But that energy is working with mindfulness and clear comprehension. So it's with mindfulness, we say that mindfulness is what lights up the mind and shows what is going on in the mind. It's what makes us aware of the mental states that are arising. Because when there's no mindfulness, then the unwholesome states can arise and sort of steal our mind from us. Whereas when there's mindfulness, then those mental states don't get the chance to arise, or if they do arise, then we become aware of them and they run away. I compare this to, it's like in a shop where they have the cameras going, and like the thief comes into a shop, and if there are no cameras, in the corners, he looks up in the corners, no cameras, then the thief can sort of slide down the aisles, look around, no attendants, and then he'll take some of the goods, put them into his pocket, and walk off, and nobody stops him. That's like the unwholesome mental states getting away with our mind, stealing our mind. But if the thief comes into the shop and looks up in the corners, and he sees the cameras are focused on the different aisles, then he'll realize, I'm not going to steal anything in this shop, and he'll walk out. So it's when we have mindfulness focused on the mind, that is lighting up the mind like the camera, so that the unwholesome states, if they're present, they'll leave, and if they're seeking an opportunity to arise, they won't get that opportunity. Okay, and then clear comprehension is what makes us understand those mental states, to understand the states that are harmful and the states that are beneficial. And so then, once we have that understanding, then energy can work with them to eliminate the unwholesome, to cultivate the wholesome. Okay, so this is the way energy works for the development first of samadhi, and then building upon samadhi. It's that energy which powers the contemplation of the real nature of things, in order for insight or wisdom to arise. Okay, that brings us to the next verse, which shows us the specific way in which the wisdom of insight arises. So this verse goes, Yo chavasa satang jive upasang udaya bayang ekahang jivitang seyo pasato udaya bayang. So if one should live 100 years without seeing arising and passing away, it's better to live a single day seeing, perceiving, arising, and passing away. And there's a little funny anecdote based on this verse. Okay, the key expression here is udaya bayang. Udaya means arising, and baya or vaya means falling away, passing away. So after the Buddha's parinibbana, when the Venerable Ananda was an old monk, he was walking by around the monastery, and he heard from one of the kutis a monk chanting this verse, but the monk got that expression wrong. He was reciting not udaya bayang, but udaka bakang, replacing the Y with a K. Now the word udaka means water, and baka is a bird that lives on water, like a crane or a stork. So he was reciting, if one should live 100 years not seeing a water bird, better to live a single day seeing a water bird. Then Ananda heard the monk reciting this, and he went into the kuti and he told the monk, no, not udaka bakang, not water bird, but udaya bayang, arising and passing away. And the monk said, yes, Bhante. Then Ananda walked out of the kuti, but didn't walk away. He stood outside the kuti, and the monk went on, still reciting udaka bakang, still reciting better than living 100 years not seeing a water bird. Is it to live one day seeing a water bird? Then Ananda shook his head and said to himself, the Buddha was right. his teaching is coming to an end. So, you young monks here, if the elders correct you, please accept their advice. Okay, so the expression here, udabayang, arising and passing away, this is sort of the essential introductory stage in the development of insight wisdom. We're now, through the practice of samadhi, to some degree, the mind has become focused, one-pointed, concentrated. So now one directs the mind to start to examine the nature of the body and the mind. And usually this is formulated in the suttas in terms of the 5 aggregates. So it's investigating the arising and passing away of the 5 aggregates. So usually, because the body is the coarsest of the aggregates, one begins with material form, the physical substance of the body, and observes how the body, within the body, there are these processes which are always occurring, always changing. You know, this is not just intellectual reflection, but because the mind is now focused, collected, very sensitive, so one could, as one sort of extends the mind through the body, one could feel in the body itself these physical processes constantly occurring, at first at relatively coarse levels, arising, passing away, arising, passing away. And then as the focus on arising and passing away gets more and more intense, then the perception of these processes of arising and passing start increasing in rapidity until it becomes, the whole body dissolves into a whole sequence or stream of just processes of events that are arising and passing, arising and passing. And then the mind, the attention moves on to the mental aggregates, to feeling, perception, the volitional activities, arising, all of them arising and passing, arising and passing. And then it turns to the apparent observer of all of this, the consciousness, and focuses in closely until it sees consciousness itself, the awareness arising and passing away. And so now one is seeing the arising and passing in all of the 5 aggregates. So this is the very clear now perception of impermanence, not just as theory, not just as doctrine, not just as a statement in the text, but the actual anicca sanya, the direct perception of impermanence. And then it's said, both in the suttas and in the commentaries, that as the perception of impermanence increases in intensity, initially we have arising and passing away, but then the attention tends to focus more and more on the aspect of passing away, so that the arising aspect falls into the background, and instead one is observing now phenomena as the texts say, kaya dhamma, vaya dhamma, viraga dhamma, nirodha dhamma, that all of these phenomena are subject to destruction, subject to vanishing, subject to fading away, subject to cessation. And so now one is into a very deep perception of impermanence. And so this is what evolves from the perception of arising and passing away to the perception of passing, fading away, and cessation. The cessation, moment by moment cessation of the 5 aggregates. And now we come to the next verse in the series. Yocha vasa satang jive apasang amata padang ekahang jivitang seo pasato amata padang. So this verse means, although one might live 100 years not seeing the deathless state, living for one day, a life of one day is better for one seeing the deathless state. So here in this verse, the key expression is amata padang. So the word pada has many meanings, but probably the best English rendering is a state, and amata is the deathless, and this is indicating nibbana. And so this verse is indicating what occurs as the arising, the insight into arising and passing away, as it proceeds from that initial insight into impermanence, then it comes into that deep insight into constant breaking up, falling away, vanishing and cessation. Then it's said that when that insight into cessation, this cessation of the five aggregates, when it reaches its peak of intensity, then the mind turns away from all conditioned phenomena, and there sort of opens up a space or a clearing where that appears which is not conditioned, not arisen, not subject to cessation, and that is nibbana, the deathless. So this is probably, it would indicate the initial breakthrough to the experience or vision or insight into the unconditioned element, into nibbana, that would mark the attainment of stream entry. And so through the progression of insight, there comes that gaining of the eye of the Dhamma. In the suttas, the expression is used, Dhamma Bisamaya, the breakthrough to the Dhamma, or sometimes the gaining of the Dhamma Chakku, the gaining of the eye of Dhamma. And what occurs with that gaining of the eye of the Dhamma, according to both suttas and commentaries, is the direct personal seeing of the unconditioned nibbana. And so that would mark the attainment of stream entry, the first of the four stages of realization, which cuts off the three fetters and sets the person on the path, the irreversible path to liberation. Okay, now comes the sixth verse, the last verse in this series. Yo chavasa satang jive apasang dhammamuttamang ekahang jivitang seyo pasato dhammamuttamang. If one should live 100 years not seeing the supreme Dhamma, a life of one day is better for one seeing the supreme Dhamma. So the key expression there is Dhammam Uttamang. And so the question is that in the previous verse it speaks about amata padang, the deathless state, the deathless element, and that is identified with nibbana. So why does the next verse speak about Dhammamuttamang, the supreme Dhamma, as if there was something superior to nibbana? Then I looked up, I was curious about that, and I looked up the commentary to the Dhammapada, and it said that by Dhammamuttamang is meant the 9 world-transcending states. Those are the 4 paths, the path of stream entry, once return and non-return, or arhatship, the corresponding 4 fruits, and nibbana as the unconditioned. But I'm not sure that I would agree with the commentary there, because it seems to me that the previous verse, speaking about seeing the unconditioned, maybe is probably referring to the initial seeing of the unconditioned, which is what takes place with the attainment of stream entry. And so what would lie beyond that is not something higher than nibbana, but it's the attainment of the final end of the path. So with the seeing of the deathless state, that's the sort of breakthrough and the entry onto the irreversible path. And the last verse is indicating the consummation of the path. So this would be the attainment of arhatship, or the liberation of the mind, the final liberation, or the irreversible liberation of the mind from all defilements. Okay, so looking now at these 6 verses, sort of getting a synoptic view of them, we see that the 6 verses are taking us through a graded series which lays out very beautifully the scheme of the Buddhist spiritual life, starting from the observance of the silas, the practice of meditation aimed at samadhi. In the next verse, we bring in the factor of panya, or wisdom, so that here we have already the threefold training around which we on which we ground our life as followers of the Buddha's teaching. But then to actually put those 3 principles into diligent practice, then we need energy or effort, which comes in the 4th verse. And then as the energy is applied, especially to developing samadhi and panya, then we undertake the development of insight meditation through contemplating the arising and passing away of phenomena. And then when that insight reaches its peak of intensity, then there comes the breakthrough, the initial breakthrough, to the seeing of the deathless state, nibbana. And then as the practice is pursued still further, then there comes the attainment of the supreme Dhamma, that irreversible liberation of the mind. Okay, so that is the whole scheme of the Buddha, sort of the scheme of the Buddha's path laid out by these 6 verses. But sort of we have to come back to the beginning, to where we find ourselves at present, and looking at these verses, think, what do we have to practice in our own life to give our life this meaning and value and significance? And so at the very outset, we have to start by getting a good grounding in the silas, the moral practices, devoting ourselves to some congenial method of mental cultivation through meditation, gain some understanding of the basic principles of the Buddha's Dhamma, which is the seed of wisdom. And then on that basis, we could apply ourselves energetically and strive to reach the higher stages laid out in the series of verses. Okay, so maybe that will do for my talk this afternoon. So again, I thank you all for your attention and wishing you all progress and joy in following the Buddha's path.